Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a stack of your sources. The focus is on traditional botanicals, specifically how they're being looked at for managing hyperlipidemia. That's elevated cholesterol and triglycerides.
Right. And it's a pretty big deal because, well, as the material highlights, it's a major risk factor for heart disease, for stroke,
Yeah.
often tied up with metabolic syndrome too. It's definitely not just a single number. It involves really complex ways the body makes, absorbs, and, processes fats.
Absolutely. So our mission here in this deep dive is to kind of dig into the science behind it all, understand how these herbs might actually work, biochemically speaking, and, pull out the most important insights from this research you shared. We've got stuff covering the biology, specific herbs, potential combinations, and maybe most importantly, the safety side. So yeah, let's unpack this stack.
Okay, what's really, I think, fascinating here is how these botanicals seem to interact with some of the very same pathways that modern drugs target.
Oh, interesting. Okay, unpack that a little, like hitting the exact same spots.
Yeah, exactly, in some cases. A prime example that really jumped out is this enzyme, HMG-CoA reductase. It's like central to the body making its own cholesterol. Prescription statins inhibit it.
Right, that's how they work.
Well, this research points out that red yeast rice actually contains a compound called monocolin K, and it's chemically identical to the statin drug levastatin.
Wait, hold on. Identical, not just similar, but the same molecule. That's pretty significant.
It is a really powerful finding.
Hmm.
And other herbs mentioned, like Alismatus rhizoma, they seem to target this enzyme too, but maybe in a different way, like reducing its genetic expression, making less of the enzyme in the first place. So different approaches, but potentially the same outcome, lowering cholesterol production.
Got it. So kind of turning down the body's cholesterol faucet. But the sources also talked about getting rid of cholesterol too, didn't they? Not just making less.
Precisely. Yeah, it's not just about production. Absorption and excretion are key parts of the story. Google resin, for instance.
Yeah.
It seems to work by blocking something called the FXR receptor. Think of it like this. Blocking that receptor basically forces the liver to use up more cholesterol to make bile acids. And then you excrete those bile acids.
Yeah.
So, yeah, opening the drain.
Okay. Turning off the tap and opening the drain. I like that visual. Makes sense. And then there were those master switches you mentioned earlier, the core regulators.
Yes, things like PPIRs.
Yeah.
Those help activate fat burning. And AMPK. AMPK is like a central energy sensor in your cells. It can tell the cell, okay, stop storing fat, start burning energy.
So these influence the bigger metabolic picture, not just one specific cholesterol step.
Exactly. Herbs like Cretagus, that's Chinese Hawthorn, they activate PPIRA. And Gyosema, and also berberine-containing herbs like Rizoma Coptidis, they're highlighted as pretty potent AMPK activators. They're flipping these really fundamental metabolic switches.
And importantly, the research didn't just focus narrowly on lipids, on fats. It showed how hyperlipidemia and atherosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries, also involve inflammation and oxidative stress. Cell damage, basically.
That's a critical point. And many of these herbs, like Salvia, miltiorrhiza, or Panax ginseng, they also bring these crucial anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects.
Which seems to lead right into that idea of synergistic formulas that came up in the sources, combining herbs that do different things.
Exactly. Complementary actions for a multi-target strategy. Instead of one herb hitting one target, you combine them to tackle different facets of the problem.
Right, like that example formula, combining red yeast rice, that's a synthesis blocker, with Google for excretion, and then adding things like milk thistle or curcuma for liver support and anti-inflammation. That makes sense.
Yeah, or another one targeting metabolic syndrome more broadly, using those powerful AMPK activators and things that improve insulin sensitivity. And a third one focusing more on the blood vessels themselves, vascular health, using potent anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, maybe even antiplatelet herbs like salvia and tuangshan. It's about a holistic approach, grounded in the science of how these herbs interact.
Okay, so we've laid out all this potential, but now the really crucial question the sources raise. Safety. Are these herbs always safe? And the material is super clear here. Natural doesn't automatically mean risk-free.
Absolutely not. That's a misconception. There are documented risks. Organ toxicity is real. Liver injury particularly is flagged with certain herbs like Polygonum, multiflorum, that's Shou Wu, especially the unprepared kind, and even Bupleurum if you take high doses.
And quality control sounds vital. You mentioned red yeast rice earlier.
Right. If it's not fermented properly, the products can contain harmful mycotoxins, contaminants. So you really need to trust the source, the quality.
And the big one, herb-drug interactions. That sounds like a major area of concern.
Huge concern. Combining red yeast rice with a prescription statin, that's basically like doubling your statin dose. which dramatically increases the risk of side effects, like muscle problems. And herbs, often thought of as improving blood circulation, like salvia or curcuma, they can increase bleeding risk if you're already taking blood thinners, something like warfarin.
Okay, wow. And what about how they affect medications generally?
Well, many botanicals affect the liver's CYP450 enzyme system. That system is how your body processes, like, tons of different drugs. So herbs can interfere, potentially making drugs less effective or more toxic by changing their levels in your body. It can be unpredictable.
So expert guidance is really not optional here, it sounds like.
It really underscores the need for it. These are potent substances.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this deep dive into your sources really tell us? It seems to paint a complex but scientifically grounded picture. These traditional herbs show fascinating potential. They target fundamental metabolic pathways. And they might offer benefits beyond just the lipid numbers by tackling inflammation, vascular health too.
Mm-hmm. And the idea of designing multi-herb formulas based on these specific complementary mechanisms, that holds significant promise.
Right.
Especially for complex conditions like metabolic syndrome where you need to hit multiple targets.
And it's a big but. This potential is inseparable from the absolute need for rigorous safety assessment.
Yeah.
Understanding the potential for toxicity, carefully managing those drug interactions, it really highlights that working with potent botanicals requires real expertise and high-quality, reliable products.
Definitely. Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought perhaps. Given this complexity, the power of these botanicals, but also the potential for interactions, how do we best move forward? How do we integrate this traditional wisdom and these potent herbs into modern healthcare?
Yes.
In a way that truly balances their potential benefits with really stringent scientific validation and, crucially, safety standards. How do we find that balance?